Hey everybody, and welcome to This Week on Point North. I'm Alistair Stevens, and I'm a little distracted as we begin today's session, as we begin this week of work, in fact, because someone on Twitter just asked me if I could explain the power hierarchy in Tolkien's Middle-earth in the span of a single tweet, and I kind of did, but now I'm slightly obsessed with the notion of hashtag kind of obsessed with how much Tolkien backstory and legendarium you can pack into a single, albeit 280 character plus size mega tweet, but I'm playing around with that and it's pretty fun. Right now I've got, I think, the Lords of the Valar would be really good, the Ladies of the Valar would be really good, and I'm thinking also the names of Aragorn. The names of Aragorn would probably fill up a single tweet. That could be a lot of fun too, so I'm just playing around with that rather than, you know, actually working, because that's what Twitter is for, is to diminish the amount of work that you accomplish in a day, thereby keeping us under the boot of the oppressor. Probably not that, but, you know, it's still Monday morning. Yes, so Sundar says, I saw 280 characters really helps with that. Yes, trying to do this in 140 characters would have been tricky. I like to think that this is the reason that Jack gave us all 280 characters over on Twitter, is just to make the Tolkien explaining a little bit easier, right? And then I'm going to delve into Harry Potter, I think. I love the idea. One tweet Potter, one tweet Tolkien. These things are good. These things are good things. It is, yeah, 280 characters was invented for Alistair, says Karen. Yes, that's entirely fair. Jane is saying, isn't that a bit like the line about someone explaining all of modern society to a time traveler? And the answer was, I have in my pocket a device that holds the sum of all human knowledge, and I use it to look at cats chasing their tails. Yes, this is, I mean, kind of the progression of human history, right? This is, I've talked about this a little bit in There and Back Again, actually, within the span of Tolkien's Legendarium, just to kind of bring these two ideas together. There is, at the end of, I guess not even the end, partway through Fellowship of the Ring, there is a brilliant Hobbit bath song. This is when Frodo and Merry and Sam arrive at Crickhollow, and they're going to stay in Buckland, ostensibly, and they have a bath after crossing the Shire on their first great adventure. So they're singing about this bath, and they get this kind of procession of ideas related to baths and bath taking, right? And they start off with how water is wonderful in its natural state, that water is a thing of beauty and can be appreciated, and that it falls from the heavens and it's great. And this is like the elvish perspective on water, right? That it is naturally beautiful. And then we get the perspective of men on water, which is that it can also be turned to purpose. It can also be turned to utility, that it can be, you know, it has a functional element that you can engage with. Ideally, that it can, you know, slake your thirst, and that's fine. And then we move on to like the dwarven perspective, which is taking it one step further and kind of rendering it not simply as a natural thing, not simply as a functional thing, but rendering it in terms of art. That's very much the dwarven perspective, is to make beautiful things out of the natural world. And then we arrive at the kind of the Hobbit apotheosis of this idea, which is that actually water is at its best when it is turned not to function, not to art, but to the highest form that anything can be turned, which is, of course, comfort. But then I think that in the real world, we've actually taken that one step further, right? We progress from the natural world to the function of the thing, to the art of the thing, to the comfort of the thing, to the capacity of the thing to entertain us when we are supposed to be working on other things, right? The kind of the prevaricative impulse here. I think that is really the explanation for all of human endeavor, and particularly the evolution of the internet. There you go. That's my little bit of philosophy for Monday morning here, that all things ultimately will be turned to, well, I suppose actually the aphoristic perspective on this is that all things ultimately will be turned to pornography, but I'm not sure that's necessarily true. I just think prevarication. I think that a certain amount of distraction and harmless and non-productive entertainment, I think that's what we lean toward as human beings. That's ultimately the purpose to which all things shall be put. Karen's calling out that she loves the bath song. I love the bath song too. It's pretty great. Melissa's saying, has anyone seen Justice League? I heard less than stellar reviews. I only go to 2 movies a year, and it will likely be Star Wars twice. I kind of like that quite a lot. Yes, I have seen Justice League. I have seen Justice League, and I have talked about Justice League over on the Excelsior podcast at commonroomradio.com. Justice League is not a disaster of a movie. Honestly, it's not. It's a mess in its first act. And I think that a lot of the criticisms that I have seen about this film have focused very much on that first act, and the fact that it literally feels as though you're watching 5 different films. Like aesthetically, musically, tonally, texturally, the whole thing just feels like a mashup of, it feels like a supercut of the 5 solo DC movies that have never actually been released, right? It feels as though someone has done a quick and dirty YouTube edit so that you don't have to watch the Wonder Woman movie and the Flash, well, I guess there was actually a Wonder Woman movie, but you don't have to watch the Ben Affleck Batman movie, and you don't have to watch the Flash movie movie. You don't have to watch the Cyborg movie. You can just watch this mashup of their origin stories. So the first act is a mess, but that is very much an inherited problem. I think that Justice League has kind of found itself in a very, very difficult position. But then it gains a great deal of clarity. It gains a surprising amount of humanity, a surprising amount of wit. It is not, let me emphasize here, great. It is fine. It is okay. It is a perfectly enjoyable. My co-host on Excelsior, Sarah Kate Pezant, described it as the worst movie that she has ever really, really enjoyed. Like, that's pretty much where it is. It's a disaster in a lot of ways, but there are enough high points that you can jump from one to the next and be suspended by that, kind of be engaged by that. I am not sure, in all honesty, that I can suggest going to the movie theater to see it. I also found the experience of watching it in a movie theater to be a little overwhelming and not my preferred medium for engaging with the DC movies, simply because they're so overwhelming. They're so bombastic in every possible sense. And literally in every sense in your body is going to be saturated by this movie as you're watching it, except taste, I suppose. We have yet to perfect the taste sensation of going to a DC superhero movie, but I'm not sure that I can really recommend it. I do have two great movies that I can recommend, both of which are available on Netflix, because that's how I spent my weekend, you guys. More on that in just a moment. Let's talk about the week ahead. Tomorrow, here on Point North Media, we have Dear Mr. Potter 33, our 33rd episode of the Dear Mr. Potter series, in which we're delving into chapters 3 and 4 of Ursula K. Le Guin's seminal novel, A Wizard of Earthsea. This is really where the story starts. What is past is prologue. We are moving into wizard school. I mean, we've got a little bit of catching up to do first, but I've been running long on a lot of my sessions of late, you guys. There's just so much to say about this material, and I get engaged in the wonderful tangents that you bring up to me here in the Crowdcast chat. So I do the best that I can, but we are going to catch up. Then we're going to cover chapters 3 and 4. We're going to talk about Shadows. We're going to talk about Wizard School. We're going to talk about some direct comparisons with Harry Potter. I'm not sure that this book is ever more Harry Potter than it is in chapter 3. That's pretty much the closest point at which these two stories intersect with one another, and there's a lot to make of that. It's a really, really fascinating discussion. So that is going to be tomorrow night, Tuesday, the 28th of November at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, at 9 p.m. Central. Then on Thursday, there and back again, number 42, a significant number for those of you who were following along with the Hitchhiker's Guide series over on the Point North Book Club. There and back again, 42, The Battle of Helm's Deep. We're going to begin by finishing up the last chapter, of course, talking more about the healing of Theoden King, talking more about the Rohirrim, talking more about the ways in which Gandalf and Aragorn in particular, both notable figures in their own right, kind of cross over with, intersect with, apply leverage to, apply dimensionality to, or create dimensionality within our conception of the Rohirrim and the kingdom of Rohan. We're going to talk a lot about that, and then we're going to get into the Battle of Helm's Deep, which is, for my money, one of the most cinematic moments that we get in all of Tolkien. It's extraordinary work, and we're going to delve deep into that. So that, though, is going to be an afternoon session. That is going to be 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2 p.m. Central on Thursday, the 30th of November, the last day of November, you guys. How has this happened? How has it happened that we're already done with November? It feels like I just turned around and it was the fall, and now it's almost Christmas. It's pretty crazy. Then on Friday, also at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, Friday afternoon, the Point North Patreon-exclusive book club will move on to the meat of Agatha Christie's wonderful Murder on the Orient Express. Last week, we talked a lot about Agatha Christie as a writer. We talked a lot about the conventions of the British detective novel, the kind of superficially the conventions of the locked room mystery. But this week, having had the facts of the case presented to us, we move on to the evidence of the case. Hercule Poirot is going to exercise his little grey cells and begin to put together the pieces of this mystery now that we have all of the raw material here to work with. So that is going to be at 3 p.m. Eastern on Friday. So that's 10 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, Tuesday, for Harry Potter, 3 p.m. Eastern Thursday for There and Back Again, and 3 p.m. Eastern on Friday for the second part of our discussion of Murder on the Orient Express. I also think that I'm going to end up going to see Murder on the Orient Express this week. So stay tuned. There may be some tweets about that, I suppose, as I emerge from the movie theater, wide-eyed, and I'm sure starstruck and awestruck by that movie. Again, kind of mixed responses to that film, but I'm into it. And I think that certainly my understanding looking at some reviews is that the criticisms of this movie are not criticisms about which I really care. So I think that my primary values are aligned with the primary values of this movie. Certainly that's the impression that I get, so I'll talk about that more next week. Though, let me see here as I scroll back through the chat to catch up with what you all are saying here. Yes, Gin Fizz is correcting me. Yeah, eventually turned into pornography. Usually it's first pornography. That is absolutely true. If you look back at the history of every major broadcast medium, certainly every kind of major distribution medium, going back to, Gutenberg, going back to cave paintings, basically, right? We have seen them first used, not explicitly for pornography, I would say, but certainly titillation, right? And the more direct and private the means of distribution, the more true that has been. Nothing has served pornography like personal streaming. Erotica in the broadest possible sense, right? Titillatory material in the broadest possible sense has been absolutely served by private media distribution and private media consumption. There is an entire industry now on Amazon, an entire industry facilitated, made possible by, in its greatest magnitude, made possible by direct distribution. No one knows what you have on your Kindle unless you choose to share it. And that has created a stunning expansion in erotica as a form, which is absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. One of these days, I am going to get around to teaching that erotica class to talk about how erotica as a narrative form achieves its goals as distinct from every other genre of storytelling, and how erotica kind of can, in some sense, supersede the other conventions of genre. It's really fascinating from an analytical and academic discourse. But yeah, I'm very into that. So Sundry says, the worst movie she's really, really enjoyed. I want to make Sarah watch Night of the Comet now. Good luck with that. Yeah, Sarah likes what she likes is the wonderful thing about Sarah. Karen says, I'm loving rereading Earthsea. I'd forgotten just enough for it to be really exciting. It's been a while since I've reread Earthsea too, and I've got to tell you, I've forgotten so much of it. Not the big stuff, but there are little... I've completely forgotten the beat that happens right at the end of chapter 4. I'm not going to talk about, what that is right now, but we'll definitely get to it this week. I'd forgotten the beat that happens right at the end of chapter 4, which is one of my favorite things in fiction. I remember having my mind blown by that when I was a kid and read Wizard of Earthsea for the first time. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. Jane is grateful for the 3 p.m. slots. I'm 19-month-old, and 10 p.m. is about the time I fall asleep, and the book I'm reading hits me in the face. Yeah, I understand that. Yes, and 3 p.m. rocks for Europe, says Lynn. I'm so glad. Yeah, I basically we formalized to this kind of 10 p.m. or 3 p.m. kind of thing. I did experiment before about, maybe some would be at 11 and some would be at 1 and some would be at 4, and that's just confusing for everyone. So I like having an afternoon slot, which is accessible for most people. I know that a lot of people in the Pacific time zone really like the 3 p.m. Eastern slots because it fits with their kind of lunch break, so they can hop in for a while at least. So we're going to continue to try and make this work for everyone, and there's a lot of love here for Helm's Deep too. Yes, I can't wait. I'm loving Helm's. I'm so eager to go back to the Lord of the Rings movies too, having talked about all of this, particularly with regard to Theoden, right? The healing of Theoden, the darkness, the shadow that falls upon Theoden is so different in the movie, like so differently intended that I stayed away from thoughts of the Two Towers movie adaptation because I don't want to corrupt my response to the book with those ideas. I want to try and keep a fire break between these two ideas now. But the minute that I am done with, I think even book 3, I'm going to go back and watch the Two Towers movie again. It's just extraordinary. As I said to those of you who were, gosh, I forget, was it in the Tolkien session last week that I was talking about it, in the There and Back Again session last week that I was talking about it, that my local retro movie theater here in Oklahoma City is showing the extended editions of the Lord of the Rings trilogy in January. So I'm going to go and see all of those on the big screen and presumably have some thoughts to share about that too. Yes. Good. All right. Let's, we're talking about Glühwein? Lynn says, at this time of year, Germany is not its best. Maybe once the snow makes winter more enjoyable and Glühwein. Wow, I haven't thought about Glühwein in years. I lived in Germany from the ages of, 12 to 14, 15. I guess, no, 11 to 14, actually. I lived in Germany. My stepfather was in the Royal Air Force, so I lived out there for a while and absolutely loved it, absolutely adored the time that I spent in Germany, and inherited a lot of, associations, particularly with Christmas, that I still continue to this day. I haven't had Glühwein in a couple of years, but I need to track some down. When I lived in Cincinnati in Ohio, there was an international an international market that carried a lot of excellent German stuff, but I haven't found a similar place here in Oklahoma City. So I need to track that down. But yeah, Stollen is like my definitive Christmas treat. Like that's something that I would never have any other time of the year, that I would never have if not for my time in Germany, but I just completely love it. So I'm very, very glad. Yes. Carla says the Christmas market there was like nothing I've ever seen. I think I still have my Glühwein mug. Oh, Glühwein is so good. Yes. There's a lot of excellent discussion here in the Crowdcast chat. This is very good, you guys. I'm so glad to have you all here with me. Let me offer, we're kind of halfway through our time already, so let me catch you up with my weekend and talk a little about what I did, because I have a couple of movie recommendations to make, both movies that I have seen before and both movies that I think I have even talked publicly about before, but I haven't seen either one of them in about a year, and took the opportunity to relax a little bit. On Saturday here in Oklahoma City, we held our Friendsgiving celebration. We had a kind of a wonderful low-key evening with great food and great wine, and just kind of hung out and sang karaoke and just did wonderful things, lit a little fire and kind of enjoyed the turning of the season, and good fellowship and camaraderie. It was wonderful. A very hobbity time was had by all, I dare say. And then on Sunday, I took some time off and watched a couple of movies. I'm going to recommend both of these. I'm going to begin with, you know what, let's begin with Before We Go, which is a movie that I can never remember the title of because the title is not actually great. Before We Go is a 2014 romantic in the truest sense, romantic in the quixotic sense, adventure of two people who crash into each other in a single night in New York City and undergo adventures. Basically kind of have this rare and treasured connection with each other for a few hours, resolve some major life problems, and then go about their business. If you've ever seen the brilliant Richard Linklater Before trilogy, the Ethan Hawke, Julie Delpy, particularly Before Sunrise, the first one, if you've seen that, then you kind of know what to expect from Before We Go. It is utterly, utterly charming. It is written by, let me find the writing credits here, 4 people working on the screenplay for this story: Ronald Bass, Jen Smolka, Chris Schaefer, and Paul Vicknair. What is most interesting about Before We Go from 2014, available now on Netflix, is that it was directed by its leading man, Chris Evans. Captain America himself both stars in this movie and directs this movie, and does a genuinely beautiful job. There is a restraint in the direction that I utterly, utterly adore. It is so low-key, it is so humble, it is so authentic. It doesn't quite land that naturalistic tone that it's going for. It's a little quippier than you might want it to be, and there are a couple of sequences that are a little more arch, a little more constructed, a little more intentional. There are moments when it deviates away from that Before Sunrise kind of aesthetic and almost approaches like the first movement of Midnight in Paris. There's something there about this kind of magical realist thing, and it's only ever for a moment, and then it's immediately subverted. But there are a couple of beats that don't quite, it's not that those beats themselves are bad, they just don't quite sit within the frame of the movie itself, but it is genuinely lovely. It's Chris Evans plays Nick, and Alice Eve plays Brooke, our leading woman. They're both fantastic. Alice Eve's accent, a little inconsistent as you move through the story. I'm particularly sensitive to accents as I watch this, despite the fact that my accent is a mongrel, foul Frankensteinian creation, but don't worry about that. They are absolutely charming. They have a great deal of chemistry. It's a knockout movie. Before We Go from 2014, available now on Netflix. Check that out. And if you watch that movie, which you should, go pay specific attention to the phone calls that Brooke makes in the course of the story. She makes 3 phone calls, of course, because we have to have a 3-beat, and they are lovely. Not just the content, but the way that the phone calls are shot, the way that time starts to fracture around the phone calls. Beautifully done. Absolutely beautifully done. So definitely check that out. That's one movie that I will recommend. The other movie that I will recommend is a movie written and directed by John Carney, who you may know from Once and Sing Street, 2 movies that one movie that I completely adored. I love Once. Once is one of my favorite films of all time. Sing Street, I've only ever seen once, and I did really enjoy it, but I also felt like I didn't get it. I felt like I didn't quite connect with the movie on its own terms, so I definitely want to watch that again, maybe a couple times more, and kind of sink into it a little bit, because right now, John Carney is just rocking it as far as I'm concerned. I completely love Once, as I said, and he also directed Begin Again from 2013, starring Mark Ruffalo and Keira Knightley in what is, for my money, her most charming performance ever. I am not actually that big a fan of Keira Knightley. I don't find her that charming. I find her utterly winning in this movie. She is great. The movie does not flag for a moment in which she is on screen. It's just beautifully done. It's ill-disciplined in a way that Once and Sing Street are not. It is self-indulgent, kind of structurally self-indulgent in a way that Once and Sing Street are not. The first act of the movie takes a willfully temporally fractured approach to its narrative. We begin where the story should begin, but then we flash back and tell us a version of the story leading up to that story. Then we flash back again and tell a different version of the story from a different perspective leading up to that inciting incident. So the movie starts strong, but then kind of feels the need to pad and expand. And we spend most of our first act actually in flashback. Then we move into what is a love letter to music and a love letter to collaboration and a love letter to romance. Again, kind of quixotic romance, a love letter to New York City. This movie is shot entirely in New York City and is utterly, utterly beautiful. If you love music, if you love the power of music to transform and to forge connections, it's just, I can't recommend it highly enough. So that is Begin Again from 2013. So that's before we go from 2014, did I say? Yes. Before we go from 2014, Begin Again from 2013, both available on Netflix. Go watch them. They're pretty great. They're also both like 90 minutes, which is great. Yeah. Let me see here. Alexa says, I love Sing Street. It's like a fusion of many things I love. See, that is exactly what I thought about Sing Street. This is so much that I adore, but it felt, as I've talked before about the ways in which all stories kind of teach you how to read them, right? The first thing that a story does is communicate its promise, communicate its intent. It settles you down and it says, okay, this is this kind of story. This is what I need from you, the viewer. And I feel as though Sing Street doesn't really do that effectively. Or perhaps just that I wasn't in the right place, in the right frame of mind, whatever, to engage with that. But for a movie which I really, really liked, I was left oddly disconnected and cold by it, which is why I think I need to go back and watch it again. I think that this is probably not a failing of the film as much as it is a failing of me, particularly given how much I love Begin Again and Once. Both just extraordinary. Leanie's saying she's such a great singer. This is Keira Knightley in Begin Again. Isn't she fantastic? And also does something which is, okay, weirdly, there's a beat in Before We Go that also works very similarly. There's a beat in Before We Go where Alice Eve sings. And within the frame of the story, it is completely unclear to me how good she is supposed to be. Is this performance supposed to be terrible and a little embarrassing? Is it supposed to be like not great, not polished, but kind of plucky? Or is it supposed to be like genuinely good? I honestly have no idea what the movie thinks about her performance in that moment. I have no idea what I am supposed to think about her performance in that moment. I think it's pretty much in that middle camp, actually. It's plucky, it's not polished, it's not refined, but it's kind of fine and maybe a little better than you expect. But I have no idea what the movie wants me to think. In Begin Again, we get performances from Keira Knightley which are clearly intended to be less confident, clearly intended to be less assured and simply less good, and then we get knockout performances. And of course, John Carney, manages to shoot music in a way that is unlike any other director currently working. He makes music visual in a way that I completely love. He also gets incredibly charming performances from every single member of the cast. It's just, yeah, it's a knockout. Mark Ruffalo isn't so bad either. Yeah, he's just lovely. Carla says that she hasn't seen Sing Street. If you're into Once and you're into into Begin Again, then you should definitely watch Sing Street. It's very good. Again, you know what? I need to watch it again. Maybe we'll do a one-shot of it. Actually, I could do a one-shot of all three of Carney's movies. I think that would be really interesting to either to look at them separately and kind of combine them into a trilogy, or just to do one long session looking at all three films and drawing like the connections between them. That could also be really interesting. But honestly, I will want to spend at least an hour talking about Once. I just adore that. Melissa says, as a native New Yorker, I'm curious about anything that depicts the city. We'll have to add it to my watch list. Both of these movies, New York, right? Both of these movies set in New York, shot in New York, love letters to New York in a way. Begin Again is a little bit more fabulous. It's a little bit more magical realist in its depiction of New York, but not in a way that rings untrue. It is, Actually, no, I think it would be really interesting. It did form a very interesting double bill watching both of these movies and certainly seeing that. Yeah. Good. All right, I think, guys, that is going to do it for our This Week on Point North. So 2 recommendations. As I say, begin again from 2013. Before we go from 2014, if you watch these movies, get in touch and let me know. I would love to know what you guys make of them. And if you have other recommendations in this form, in this oeuvre, in this medium, then let me know, and I'll check those out too. I'm trying to watch more movies that aren't just for work, as it were. I want to kind of expand out my general cinematic literacy here. That's pretty much one of my plans for the year to come. Just making New Year's resolutions here at the end of November. I think that's a perfectly consistent thing to do. That, though, is going to do it. So let's circle back around to our plans for the week. Tomorrow evening, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, Dear Mr. Potter 33. That is entitled Shadows for chapters 3 and 4 of Ursula K. Le Guin's A Wizard of Earthsea. Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, There and Back Again 42, chapter 6 of book 3 of The Two Towers, Helm's Deep. So we're going to talk about, as I say, we're going to go back a little bit, talk about the healing of Theoden, and then talk about the Battle of Helm's Deep. And then Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, part 2 of Agatha Christie's epic, brilliant Murder on the Orient Express, about which, by the way, I received a Twitter DM last night that has potentially at least completely changed the way that I look at that book. I need to give this some thought. I need to give some thought to exactly the kind of perspective that Agatha Christie is offering. Okay, here it is. I'm going to credit this to the wonderful Becca Eller, who I don't think is joining us right now, but who is, as you know, fantastic. Becca sent me a DM last night, potentially at least, or noting the similarities between Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express and the objectivist works of Ayn Rand. Not necessarily saying that they are one and the same, but that they are, they contain within them similar motifs and some similar social dynamics. I am utterly fascinated about that, and utterly fascinated about the way in which that kind of sits with this mid-century discord, this discontinuity between this kind of Victorian aristocratic sensibility and the mid-century kind of brutalist egalitarian sensibility. I think there's something so interesting there. So I'm going to be thinking a lot about that over the course of the next few days. And then, hey, we might talk a little about Ayn Rand on Friday night, or Friday afternoon, I should say, just to kind of, complete our week, I guess. All right, that is going to do it for now. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. Have a great Monday. I will talk to you all again tomorrow for Dear Mr. Potter. Until then, take care.